Scientists speculate that the first green plant to come to Long Island after the glaciers receded over 10,000 years ago was a grass like this one. Its seeds took root and grew and turned the coastal mud into marshes. The salt marshes and the estuaries of which they are a part seem unimportant, but actually they are the most fertile places in the world. Protected from the sea by barrier beaches, they harbor and feed an immense population of living things. Even in winter, the marsh has beauty. Under the snow, its dead grasses decompose, but their roots remain alive and await the spring. Winter their flatness and encrust their pines with ice. The salt marsh is a land extender and a land protector. It does not give in easily. Many shorebirds and waterfowl spend their winters on the wetlands, wild geese and ducks. One of the handsomer species is the canvasback with his ruddy head. The greater scaup or bluebill is another winter guest. Rarest and loveliest of all is Barrow's goldeneye, which breeds in Labrador. Both the male and female have striking eyes. When the snow has gone, decomposing microbes increase. Dead organic matter becomes particles of detritus. Nutrients, vitamins, and proteins drift out to feed life in the sea. The returning sea holds microscopic floating life. Minute plants, called phytoplankton, grow and multiply. Feeding on them are equally small animals called zooplankton, including the larvae of worms, crustaceans, and shellfish. This is the beginning of the all-important food chain. With the greening of spring, the perennial grasses cover the meadows with their new growth. Salicornia, a succulent plant that can stand the saltiest soil, sends up its red and green shoots from seeds. Colonies of simple algae fringe the shore, showing green and reddish hues at low tide. These are the superfood producers. Scientists classify the larger algae by their colors. In the green family, ulva, or sea lettuce, dominates. It yields over 20% protein to the marine life that eats it. Two other green algae are Enteromorpha and Cladophora. At low tide, they make the greenest spots on the marsh. Bladderwrack, or rockweed, are names for fucus, the most common of the brown algae. It has to have something solid to hang on to, like a stone. Sharing that stone is a ribbed mussel, and this little shellfish rates a story of its own. Just a minor part of the marsh in terms of food, it performs a vital function. Embedded in the mud, it fertilizes the alterniflora grass by transferring a needed nutrient, phosphorus. If you happen to examine this mussel more closely, you may notice it has a purplish stain. This comes from sulfur, another essential element that's cycled into the marsh by a specialized bacteria. The red algae are less in bulk than the browns, but richer in species. They include ceramium, polysifonia, and the more complicated but still fragile champia. In Long Island's shallow bays grow two more remarkable plants. They're neither seaweeds nor grasses, though they're called both. They're actually flowering plants that once grew on land but moved back to the sea. One of them is widgeon grass, or Rupia marittima. The other is eel grass, or Zostra marina. It's called a nuisance because it fouls up boat propellers and washes up on shore. But old-timers called it the best garden mulch in the world, since it's nutritious and has no weed seeds. But to really appreciate eelgrass, you have to see it underwater. To begin with, it's a valuable food for finfish, shellfish, and waterfowl. It releases oxygen by photosynthesis. It dampens the forces of wind and tide. It stabilizes mud banks and keeps the bays from shifting and silting. 40 years ago, a disease almost wiped it out on both sides of the Atlantic, and this had a disastrous effect on scallop and clam fisheries. Today, eelgrass is coming back, and millions of small sea creatures revel in it. A hermit crab goes scavenging for food in his borrowed shell. Many kinds of crabs inhabit the wetlands, but one of the most engaging is the one that can be seen coming out of his burrow at low tide, the fiddler. It's called an indicator species, for its presence indicates a healthy marsh, free of pesticides. Many predators consider the fiddler a delicacy, so he stays in running distance of his hole. One of the hunters is a shy and secretive bird, the clapper rail. Clapper rails prefer to run through the grass, but they can fly and even swim with just their bills above the water. They make their nests on the ground in the Spartina grasses. To shorebirds, the salt marsh is a dining place, especially at low tide. The most effective feeders are the wading birds, from the quick-moving little sandpipers to the larger snowy egrets. Nothing that moves in the water escapes the sharp eyes or the stout beak of a yellowlegs or a heron. The marsh is a place for hiding, and birds do this to perfection. When a mallard duck waddles to her nest by the edge of a bank, the more brightly colored male draws your attention from her by swimming down the stream alongside. But once his mate is on her nest, you will scarcely be able to see her. From just above, it's not too hard to make her out, but from the side, she's practically invisible, and from less than 3 feet away. The rise and fall of the tides help make the wetlands as fertile as they are. Twice a day, they flood and flush this rich green shore. If the sea were perfectly still, the system wouldn't work. There'd be no mix of waters, of sediments and salts. The swelling waters provide a sanctuary that's laden with food and make a nursery ground for many juvenile fish. Regular seining by government agencies reveal the true worth of the wetlands as a storehouse of the sea. This haul, by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, takes place on Great South Bay, but similar ones occur on both shores of Long Island, and they bear out an important biological point. 2 out of every 3 species of useful Atlantic fish depend on ocean estuaries for their very survival. If these growing places for so many different kinds of fish were destroyed, sport fisheries, and commercial fishing too, would be ruined. Smooth cordgrass, Spartina alterniflora. Few people even know about it, but it's one of the biggest success stories in the kingdom of plants. It flourishes from Newfoundland to Texas, this grass that grows by the sea, because nothing else can do what it can so well. It grows in either fresh or salt water. It can build up salt in its internal cells to keep the sea from killing it. It can drive oxygen down into airless mud to feed and stiffen its roots. On top of all this, it builds up land and is a primary producer of food. When you see alterniflora growing in the wetlands, you know there's seawater there. It can grow higher than a man's shoulders. Late in the summer, its leaves form a visible stalk with a hollow stem, and this will support its seed. Like all grasses, its flowers need no color, no fragrance, and no honey to attract insects. They're pollinated by the wind. Just behind the alterniflora, looking darker green, is its sister grass, Spartina patens. Patens has a much finer texture and lies in flattened, floppy shapes that look like cowlicks. Both Spartinas are perennials. They spread by sending rhizomes or rootstocks out into the earth. Patens has a look-alike companion called spikegrass or disticus. They're easy to tell apart when they're in bloom, for disticus has a whitish flower and patens a reddish purple. In a slightly higher zone, just inches above high tide, grows the marsh elder, Iva. Iva often follows man-made contours. When you see it crossing a marsh like this, you may be looking at an old fence line, or even an ancient Indian trail. Blackgrass, or Juncus gerardi, is actually a rush. It grows luxuriantly in the higher marsh, and it's readily recognized by its dark seeds. The bulrush, Scirpus americanus, is also easy to identify. It has a triangular stem for rigidity. And on that stem, it bears just one flower, like this. Cattails, or typha, make a pretty sight in the upper marsh. Its roots are one of the favorite foods of muskrats. Behind and above the cattails towers the common reed, Phragmites. Besides its height, it has familiar tassel-like flowers. Whenever you see Phragmites, you know you're at a landward edge of the wetlands. Not everything in the marsh is just plain green. In late summer, you may come across the lovely wild hibiscus or marshmallow. Unlike the grasses, it needs insects to pollinate its flowers. And it has so many, it attracts another kind. You see it? The praying mantis. Goldenrod, the seaside variety, adds bright yellow to the late summer shore. And bayberries, beloved by colonial candle makers for their aromatic seeds. Often on the southern shore of Long Island, you see them in rounded masses, sculptured into shapes like this by the constant winds. Another plant that can stand salt spray on its leaves is the wild beach plum. When Henry Hudson made his voyage to America, he made note of these plums that grew by the shore. But just one word of caution. Another plant thrives in the upper marshes too, poison ivy. Autumn is one of the loveliest of seasons on the wetlands. The seed heads of the cattails and phragmites get ready to fly away. Fallen seeds, fallen leaves, and the extreme high tides of the autumn equinox. Even as they begin to die, the stems of alterniflora protect the land. They're still capable of controlling huge quantities of floodwaters that pour in from Long Island Sound or the Atlantic Ocean. Equinoctial storms lash the shore with wind and rain. When the storms subside, the wetlands provide one last burst of gold, looking like wheat fields half submerged in seawater. In fact, they are many times richer than any field of grain, supporting waterfowl, finfish, shellfish, and eventually man. Once again, the winter comes, and the cycle of seasons goes on. The Spaniards of old had an expression for the kind of land formation that makes a salt marsh. Father Island, Mother Bay. That's really what the wetlands are. Behind protective islands, a fertile, productive shore.